The night was thick with rain, the kind that made the city's lights blur and the world feel smaller, more secretive. In the heart of Manhattan, the private hospital's entrance glowed like a beacon, but inside, chaos reigned. The marble floors, usually polished to a mirror shine, were scuffed by hurried footsteps. Doctors in crisp coats, nurses with tired eyes, and administrators in expensive suits all crowded the hallway, their voices rising in a storm of confusion and frustration. At the center of it all, on a battered stretcher, lay Roland Ashcroft, 77 years old, a billionaire whose name was whispered in boardrooms and printed in headlines, now looked like a ghost of himself. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, once sharp and commanding, flickered with exhaustion. He was surrounded not by admirers or business partners, but by a team of medical professionals who seemed more interested in passing responsibility than in saving a life. "We can't admit him," barked Dr. Feldman, the hospital's chief of medicine, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "We don't have the right equipment for this, whatever this is. His symptoms don't match anything we've seen." A lawyer in a tailored suit, face pinched with anger, thrust a stack of papers at the doctor. "This is refusal of care. Do you know who this man is? He could buy your entire hospital chain with a single phone call." The staff barely listened. They were too busy arguing, too busy protecting themselves. The billionaire's children, 3 of them, each more anxious than the last, hovered nearby, their faces masks of concern and calculation. Richard, the eldest, checked his watch every few seconds, as if time itself could be bought or sold. Veronica, perfectly styled even in crisis, clutched her designer bag like a shield. David, the youngest, stood apart, his gaze fixed on the floor, lost in thoughts he would never share. In the midst of this storm, almost invisible, was a woman in a faded blue uniform. She sat quietly on a stool beside the stretcher, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide and uncertain. Her name was Lila. She was the night janitress, the one who swept the halls when the world was asleep, the one who knew every creak and shadow of the hospital. No one noticed her, no one ever did, but Lila noticed everything. She saw the way the doctor's hands shook as they argued. She saw the billionaire's lips tremble as he tried to speak, only to be drowned out by the noise. She saw the children's fear, hidden behind anger and impatience, and she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, heavy and cold. The noise grew louder, a cacophony of blame and desperation. Lila pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block it out. The world became a blur of sound and light, and for a moment she felt as if she might disappear entirely. Then, without thinking, she began to hum. It was a soft sound, barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. The melody was simple, a lullaby she remembered from her childhood, sung to her by a woman whose face she could no longer recall. The notes floated through the air, gentle and clear, and one by one the voices in the hallway fell silent. Doctors turned, nurses paused. Even the billionaire's children looked up, startled by the sudden calm. Roland Ashcroft opened his eyes. For the first time in hours, he seemed to see the world around him. A single tear slid down his cheek, tracing a path through the lines of age and regret. The lawyer lowered his papers. The doctors stepped back. In the hush that followed, Lila's song filled the space, wrapping everyone in a warmth that had nothing to do with medicine or money. When the last note faded, the head doctor cleared his throat, his voice soft. "Now, let's move him to a room. We'll do what we can." No one argued. The billionaire was wheeled away, his children trailing behind, their faces changed in ways they didn't yet understand. Lila sat quietly, her hands still trembling. She didn't know what had come over her. She only knew that, for a moment, she had been seen. The hospital settled into a new rhythm. Roland was given a private suite, the best the hospital could offer. Specialists were called in, tests were run, and the days blurred together in a haze of uncertainty. The billionaire's illness remained a mystery, defying diagnosis and treatment. Each morning, his children arrived, their conversations clipped and businesslike. Each night they left, their father no closer to recovery. But Lila remained. She cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, and when no one was looking, sat by Roland's bedside. She spoke little, but her presence was a comfort. Sometimes, when the pain was too much, she would hum the lullaby again, and Roland would close his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. The staff began to notice. The nurses, at first skeptical, saw how the billionaire's breathing eased when Lila was near. The doctors, frustrated by their own helplessness, found themselves lingering in the hallway, listening to her song. Word spread. The story of the janitress who soothed the billionaire became a quiet legend, whispered in the break rooms and cafeterias. Some called it a miracle, others called it luck, but everyone agreed that something had changed. One evening, as the rain battered the windows and the city outside seemed a world away, Roland's eldest son approached Lila. He was awkward, uncertain, unused to speaking to people who could not help him close a deal. "My father. He seems better when you're here," Richard said, his voice low. "I don't understand it." Lila looked up, her eyes gentle. "Sometimes, all someone needs is a little kindness." Richard nodded, unsure. He returned to his father's side, but the words lingered. In the days that followed, Lila's presence became a fixture in Roland's room. She brought him water, adjusted his blankets, and, when the pain was too much, sang her lullaby. The billionaire's children watched, their skepticism slowly giving way to something like hope. The hospital's routine, once rigid and impersonal, began to shift. Nurses who had once hurried past Lila now paused to greet her, sometimes even asking if she would sing for them during the long, lonely night shifts. The doctors, too, found themselves drawn to the quiet strength she radiated. It was as if her presence softened the sharp edges of the place, making it feel less like a fortress of suffering and more like a sanctuary. But not everyone welcomed the change. Veronica, Roland's daughter, watched Lila with a wary eye. She was used to being in control, to managing crises with a flick of her wrist and a well-timed phone call. The idea that a janitress could succeed where the world's best doctors had failed unsettled her. She began to question the staff, pressing for updates, demanding explanations. "Isn't there something more you can do?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "My father is not a charity case. He deserves the best." Dr. Feldman, exhausted and out of answers, could only shake his head. "We're doing everything possible, Ms. Ashcroft. His condition is unique." Veronica's lips thinned. She turned her attention to Lila, her gaze sharp. "And you? What exactly do you think you're doing here?" Lila met her eyes, unflinching. "I'm just trying to help." Veronica scoffed, but there was a tremor in her voice. "Help? You're a janitress. You clean floors. You don't heal people." Lila said nothing. She simply returned to her work, her movements calm and steady. But the words stung, and for the first time she wondered if she truly belonged in that room. That night, as she mopped the hallway outside Roland's suite, she heard voices drifting through the door. The billionaire's children were arguing, their words sharp and brittle. "He's getting worse," Richard said, his tone clipped. "The doctors are useless. We need to think about arrangements." Veronica's reply was cold. "You mean the will? Don't pretend you're not thinking about it." David's voice, softer but no less pained, cut through the tension. "He's our father. Can't we just be here for him?" There was a pause, heavy with things unsaid. Lila moved away, her heart aching for a family that seemed to be falling apart. Inside the room, Roland listened to his children, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. He felt the distance between them, a chasm that no amount of money could bridge. He thought of Lila, of the way her song had quieted the chaos, and wondered why it was so hard for his own children to offer the same comfort. The days passed in a blur of tests and consultations. Specialists came and went, each more perplexed than the last. The hospital administrators grew nervous, worried about the reputation of their institution. The media caught wind of the story, a billionaire struck down by a mysterious illness, his fate hanging in the balance. Reporters camped outside the hospital, their cameras trained on the entrance, hungry for any scrap of news. Through it all, Lila remained a constant. She moved quietly through the halls, her presence a balm to those who noticed her. She brought small comforts to Roland, a cup of tea, a warm blanket, a gentle word. Sometimes, when the pain was too much, she would sit by his bed and sing, her voice weaving through the silence like a thread of hope. One evening, as the city outside was swallowed by darkness, Roland reached for Lila's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care?" Lila hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because everyone deserves kindness. Even the richest man in the world can feed, all alone." Roland smiled, a flicker of his old self shining through. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who believed in the power of small things. Lila squeezed his hand gently. Sometimes the small things are the most important. The door opened and Veronica entered, her expression guarded. She paused, taking in the scene, the billionaire and the janitress, hands clasped, a moment of peace in the midst of turmoil. "I need to speak with my father," she said, her tone clipped. Lila nodded and stood, but Roland held her hand a moment longer. "Thank you," he said softly. As Lila left the room, she caught a glimpse of herself in the polished glass of a framed photograph. For the first time, she saw not just a janitress, but a woman who mattered. The hospital's staff began to talk. Some were skeptical, dismissing Lila's influence as superstition. Others believed she was a miracle worker, sent by fate to save a dying man. The truth was simpler. Lila was a woman who had known hardship, who understood what it meant to be invisible, and who believed that even the smallest act of kindness could change a life. One night, as a storm raged outside, Roland's condition took a turn for the worse. The monitors beeped frantically, and the medical team rushed to his side. His children were summoned, their faces pale with fear. Lila stood in the corner, her heart pounding. She wanted to help, but she knew there was nothing she could do. She watched as the doctors worked, their voices urgent, their hands steady. She watched as the billionaire's children clung to each other, their differences forgotten in the face of loss. And then, as the chaos reached its peak, Lila began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, barely audible over the noise. But as she sang, the room seemed to quiet. The doctors slowed, their movements more deliberate. The children stopped crying, their eyes fixed on Lila. Even the machines seemed to settle, their beeping less frantic. The song was the same lullaby she had sung before, but this time it carried a new weight. It was a song of hope, of love, of the belief that even in the darkest moments, there is light. When the last note faded, the room was silent. Roland's breathing eased, his face relaxing into a peaceful smile. The doctors exchanged glances, unsure of what had just happened. Veronica approached Lila, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how you did it, but thank you." Lila smiled, her own eyes wet. "Sometimes all we need is a little music." The storm outside finally subsided, but inside the hospital, a different kind of storm was brewing. News of what had happened in Roland's room spread quickly. Nurses whispered about the janitress who calmed a dying billionaire with nothing but a song. Doctors, usually so rational and scientific, found themselves at a loss for words. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but others, especially those who had witnessed it firsthand, felt something shift inside them, a quiet awe, a sense that they had seen a miracle. The next morning the hospital was buzzing. Reporters who had been waiting for a tragedy now clamored for a story of hope. "Who is the mysterious woman who soothed the billionaire?" headlines asked. Cameras flashed as Lila arrived for her shift, her uniform still damp from the rain. She kept her head down, uncomfortable with the attention, but there was no hiding anymore. She had become part of the story. Inside Roland's suite, the mood was different. The billionaire, though still weak, seemed lighter. His eyes followed Lila as she moved about the room, and when she paused to adjust his pillow or bring him water, he smiled. A real, genuine smile that had been missing for months. Richard, ever the pragmatist, tried to make sense of it all. "Father, do you feel better because of her? Or is it just coincidence?" Roland looked at his son, his gaze steady. "Sometimes, Richard, the things that heal us can't be measured. Not by machines, not by charts. Sometimes it's just a feeling." Veronica, who had always prided herself on her logic, found herself at a loss. She watched Lila with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude, unable to reconcile the two. David, the quietest of the siblings, seemed to understand best. He often lingered in the background, watching Lila with thoughtful eyes, as if trying to memorize the way she moved, the way she sang. As the days passed, Roland's condition stabilized. The doctors, though still baffled, began to hope. They adjusted his medications, ran new tests, and consulted with specialists from around the world. But through it all, it was Lila's presence that seemed to make the greatest difference. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, Roland asked Lila to sit with him. She hesitated, glancing at the monitors and the ever-present nurses, but he insisted. "Please, Lila, just for a moment." She sat, folding her hands in her lap. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of machines. "Tell me about yourself," Roland said. "I know so little, and yet, you've done more for me than anyone." Lila blushed, unused to being the center of attention. "There's not much to tell. I grew up in the city. My mother was a nurse, my father a mechanic. They worked hard, but we never had much. When I was young, my mother used to sing to me, that lullaby. It's all I have left of her." Roland listened, his eyes soft. She must have been a remarkable woman. "She was," Lila said quietly. "She taught me that kindness is the most important thing in the world. Even when you have nothing, you can still give kindness." Roland nodded, his gaze distant. "I wish I had learned that lesson sooner." There was a pause, heavy, with unspoken regrets. Lila reached out, her hand resting gently on his. "It's never too late," she said. The door opened and Richard entered, his expression tense. "Father, the board is asking for an update. They want to know when you'll be back." Roland sighed. "Tell them I'll return when I'm ready. For now, I need to focus on what matters." Richard hesitated, then nodded. He glanced at Lila, his eyes searching. "Thank you," he said, the words awkward but sincere. Lila smiled, her heart lifting. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. That evening, as the hospital settled into its nighttime hush, Lila found herself alone in the chapel. She sat in the back pew, her hands clasped, her thoughts swirling. She had never believed in miracles, but something about the past few days felt different. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not for herself, but for Roland, for his children, for everyone who had ever felt lost or alone. As she left the chapel, she nearly collided with Veronica. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with tension. "I owe you an apology," Veronica said finally. "I was unkind. I didn't understand." Lila shook her head. "You were worried about your father. I understand." Veronica's eyes filled with tears. "He's all we have left. I don't know what I'd do if we lost him." Lila reached out, her touch gentle. "You won't lose him. Not if you hold on to what matters." Veronica nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Lila, for everything." The days turned into weeks. Roland's health continued to improve, and the hospital staff marveled at his recovery. The story of the billionaire and the janitress became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness could light the way. But not everyone was happy. The hospital administration, wary of the media attention, began to question Lila's role. Was it appropriate for a janitress to spend so much time with a patient? Was she overstepping her bounds? Rumors began to circulate, whispers of favoritism and impropriety. One morning, Lila was called into the administrator's office. She sat nervously, her hands twisting in her lap. "Lila, we appreciate your dedication," the administrator began, his tone formal. "But there are concerns about your involvement with Mr. Ashcroft. Some staff feel uncomfortable." Lila's heart sank. "I never meant to cause trouble. I just wanted to help." The administrator sighed. "We know, but we have to maintain professional boundaries. For now, we're asking you to limit your time in Mr. Ashcroft's room." Lila nodded, her eyes stinging with tears. She left the office, her steps heavy. For the first time, she felt truly alone. Lila returned to her duties, her presence in the hallways now more ghostly than ever. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, but the hospital felt colder, emptier. The staff who had once smiled at her now avoided her gaze, uncertain how to act. Even the nurses who had asked for her songs seemed distant, as if afraid that kindness might be contagious or worse, forbidden. In Roland's suite, the change was felt immediately. The air, once filled with gentle music and quiet conversation, grew heavy with silence. The billionaire's children noticed the difference too. Richard became more irritable, snapping at the staff. Veronica retreated into herself, her phone a constant companion. David, always the quiet one, spent more time by the window, staring out at the city lights. Roland himself seemed to fade. His appetite waned, his energy ebbed, and the spark that had returned to his eyes began to dim. The doctors, baffled by the sudden decline, ran more tests, adjusted his medications, and consulted with specialists from across the globe. But nothing helped. The mystery illness, which had seemed to loosen its grip, now tightened again, as if feeding on the absence of hope. One evening, as the city outside was bathed in the gold and glow of sunset, Roland asked for Lila. The nurse hesitated, glancing at the chart, then at the door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ashcroft. Lila's been reassigned. She's not allowed in this wing anymore." Roland's face fell. "Why? She's done nothing wrong." The nurse shifted uncomfortably. "It's hospital policy. They say it's for your own good." Roland turned away, his voice barely audible. Sometimes the rules do more harm than good. That night, the billionaire lay awake, his mind racing. He thought of his life, of boardrooms and deals, of victories and losses, of the family he had built and the love he had lost. He thought of Lila, of her song, of the way she had made him feel seen, not as a billionaire, but as a man. In the janitor's closet, Lila sat on a battered stool, her head in her hands. She could hear the distant hum of the hospital, the beeping of machines, the soft murmur of voices. She wondered if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared. She wondered if kindness was worth the cost. The next morning, Roland's condition worsened. The doctors were called in, their faces grim. The billionaire's children gathered at his bedside, their fear palpable. "Is there nothing more you can do?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking. Dr. Feldman shook his head. "We're doing everything possible. Sometimes medicine isn't enough." Veronica's eyes filled with tears. He was getting better. What changed? No one had an answer. David, who had watched the whole scene in silence, finally spoke. "It's Lila. He needs her." Richard scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. She's a janitress, not a doctor." David shook his head. "You didn't see him when she was here. He was different, happier, stronger." Veronica looked at her brother, then at her father. "Maybe he's right. Maybe we should ask for her." Richard hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, I'll talk to the administrator." It took hours of negotiation, but eventually the hospital relented. Lila was allowed back into Olan's room under strict supervision. She entered quietly, her heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. Roland's eyes lit up when he saw her. "Lila," he whispered, his voice trembling with relief. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I'm here, Mr. Ashcroft." The room seemed to breathe again. The tension eased, the air grew lighter. Lila sat by Roland's side, her presence a balm to his weary soul. She didn't sing at first, afraid of drawing too much attention. But as the night wore on, and the hospital grew quiet, she began to hum, her voice soft and steady. The effect was immediate. Roland's breathing slowed, his face relaxed, and for the first time in days, he slept peacefully. The nurses, watching from the doorway, exchanged glances. "It's like magic," one whispered. The next morning, Roland was stronger. He ate breakfast, joked with the staff, and even asked for the newspaper. The doctors, though still skeptical, couldn't deny the improvement. Word spread quickly. The story of the janitress who healed the billionaire became a sensation. Reporters camped outside the hospital, their cameras trained on every entrance. The hospital administration, once wary, now saw an opportunity. They arranged interviews, staged photo ops, and spun the story into a tale of hope and resilience. But for Lila, none of that mattered. All she cared about was Roland. She spent her days by his side, singing when he needed comfort, listening when he needed to talk. She learned about his life, his triumphs and regrets, his dreams and disappointments. She saw the man behind the fortune, the father behind the legend. One afternoon, as the city buzzed with the news of Roland's recovery, he turned to Lila, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You saved me," he said simply. Lila shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you how." Roland smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Promise me, sir." Thing, Lila. "Promise me you'll never stop singing. Not just for me, but for anyone who needs to hear it." Lila nodded, her heart full. I promise. The days that followed were unlike any the hospital had ever seen. The story of Roland Ashcroft and the janitress who sang for him swept through the city like wildfire. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Journalists jostled for position, hoping to catch a glimpse of the billionaire or the mysterious woman who had become the heart of his recovery. Inside, the staff moved with a new sense of purpose, their pride in their work rekindled by the hope that had blossomed in the most unlikely of places. But not everyone was pleased. The hospital's board of directors, wary of the attention, convened an emergency meeting. They debated the risks and rewards of the sudden fame, their voices rising in heated argument. Some saw opportunity, a chance to rebrand the hospital as a place of miracles. Others feared scandal, worried that the line between professionalism and sentimentality had been crossed. In the midst of this, Lila tried to keep her world small. She focused on her work, cleaning the halls and tending to Roland with quiet devotion. She avoided the cameras, ducked away from reporters, and politely declined every request for an interview. She knew that her place was not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, where kindness could do its work unseen. Roland, for his part, seemed to thrive. His strength returned, his appetite improved, and his laughter, once a rare and precious thing, became a daily occurrence. He spent hours talking with Lila, sharing stories from his youth, confiding secrets he had never told anyone. He spoke of his late wife, of the mistakes he had made, of the loneliness that had haunted him even in the midst of his success. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside his window, Roland turned to Lila with a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, his voice soft. Lil had considered the question, her eyes distant. "I'm not sure. I think sometimes life brings people together for a reason. Maybe it's fate, or maybe it's just kindness finding its way." Roland nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I used to think I could control everything, that money and power could solve any problem. But lying here, listening to you sing, I realized how wrong I was. The things that matter most can't be bought." Lila smiled, her heart aching with understanding. "Sometimes the richest people are the ones who have the least." Roland laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "You're wiser than most of the CEOs I've ever met." Their bond deepened with each passing day. The staff, once skeptical, now looked to Lila as a source of comfort and inspiration. Nurses asked her to sing for other patients, and soon her lullabies echoed through the halls, bringing peace to those who needed it most. But as Roland's health improved, a new challenge emerged. His children, who had watched his decline with growing fear, now found themselves facing a different kind of uncertainty. Richard, ever the strategist, worried about the future of the family business. Veronica, torn between gratitude and suspicion, questioned Lila's motives. David, the quiet observer, struggled to find his voice in the shifting landscape of their lives. One afternoon, the three siblings gathered in the hospital's private lounge, their conversation tense. "We need to talk about what happens next," Richard began, his tone brisk. "Father can't run the company forever. We need a plan." Veronica frowned, her arms crossed. "He's getting better. Maybe he'll want to come back." David shook his head. "He's changed, you can see it. He's not the same man he was before." Richard sighed, frustration etched into his features. "We can't just wait and see. The board is restless. Investors are asking questions, and then there's Lila." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "What about her?" Richard hesitated. "She's become important to him. More important than any of us, it seems." David looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." Veronica bristled. "She's a janitress, David. She doesn't belong in our world." David met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Maybe our world needs someone like her." The conversation ended in silence, the siblings unable to bridge the gap between them. Outside, the hospital hummed with life, but inside, the Ashcroft family was adrift, searching for a new anchor. That night, as Lila prepared to leave, Roland called her to his side. He took her hand, his grip strong and sure. "Lila, I want you to promise me something," he said, his eyes earnest. "No matter what happens, don't let anyone make you feel small. You have a gift. Don't hide it." Lila nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I promise." As she left the room, she passed the siblings in the hallway. Richard offered a curt nod, Veronica looked away, and David managed a small, grateful smile. Lila returned it, her heart full of hope and uncertainty. The hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, the city outside alive with possibility. In his suite, Roland drifted off to sleep, the echoes of Lila's song lingering in the air. For the first time in a long time, he dreamed not of loss or regret, but of hope, a hope born not of wealth or power, but of kindness, freely given and gratefully received. The next morning dawned with a rare clarity, sunlight streaming through the hospital's tall windows and painting golden stripes across the polished floors. Lila arrived early, her steps light despite the weight of the previous days. She paused in the staff lounge, pouring herself a cup of coffee, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply breathe. The hospital was waking up, the usual chorus of beeping monitors and distant voices rising in the air, but today it all felt different, brighter somehow, as if hope itself had seeped into the walls. As she made her way to Roland's suite, she was stopped by a nurse she barely knew. "Leela, would you mind singing for Mrs. Patel in 312 later? She hasn't slept in days. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do, but, well, you know." Lila smiled, touched by the request. "Of course. I'll stop by after my rounds." Word of her kindness had spread, and now even the most skeptical staff members found themselves seeking her out. She was no longer invisible. She was a presence, a gentle force that seemed to bring comfort wherever she went. When she entered Roland's room, she found him sitting up in bed, a newspaper spread across his lap. He looked up, his face breaking into a smile. "Good morning, Lila. Did you see the sunrise? It was spectacular." She shook her head, setting down her cleaning supplies. "I missed it, but I'm glad you saw it." He folded the paper, his eyes twinkling. "You know, I used to think every day was just another chance to make money. Now I see it's a gift. I owe that to you." Lila blushed, unsure how to respond. She busied herself with the routine tasks, straightening the sheets, fluffing the pillows, checking the water pitcher. But Roland watched her, his gaze thoughtful. "Lila, have you ever thought about what you want? I mean, really want. Not just for today, but for your life." She paused, considering the question. "I suppose I've always wanted to help people, to make a difference, even if it's just in small ways." He nodded. "You've done more than that. You've changed my life, and I think you could change others, too." Before she could reply, the door opened and Richard entered, his expression serious. "Father, the board is on a video call. They want to speak with you." Roland sighed, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Duty calls," he said, forcing a smile. "Will you stay, Lila? I'd like you to hear this." She hesitated, but he insisted, so she took a seat in the corner, out of the camera's view. The call began, the faces of the board members filling the screen. They greeted Roland with a mixture of relief and concern, their questions coming quickly. "How are you feeling, Mr. Ashcroft? When do you expect to return? Is it true what the papers are saying about your recovery?" Roland answered patiently, his tone measured. "I'm improving, thanks to the excellent care I've received here, but I won't be rushing back. My health and my family come first." There was a murmur of surprise. One board member, a stern-faced woman, pressed further. "And the rumors about unconventional treatments? About a janitress who sings to you?" Roland smiled, glancing at Lila. "Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. I've learned that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about connection, about kindness. I hope we can bring more of that into our company, too." The board fell silent, unsure how to respond. Richard watched his father, a new respect dawning in his eyes. After the call ended, Roland turned to Lila. "Thank you for being here. I meant what I said. The world needs more kindness." She nodded, her heart full. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story." Later that day, Lila visited Mrs. Patel in 312. The elderly woman lay in bed, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Lila sat beside her, taking her hand, and began to sing. The lullaby was soft, a gentle thread weaving through the silence. Slowly, Mrs. Patel's breathing eased, her face relaxing into a peaceful smile. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, child. I haven't felt this calm in years." Word of Lila's gift spread even further. Patients requested her by name. Families left notes of gratitude. The hospital administration, once wary, now embraced her as a symbol of hope. They even considered creating a new position, patient comfort liaison, just for her. But not everyone was convinced. Veronica, still struggling with her odors, and doubts, watched Lila with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. One afternoon, she cornered Lila in the hallway. "Why do you do it?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Why do you care so much?" Lila met her gaze, her own eyes steady. "Because I know what it's like to feel alone, and I know that even the smallest kindness can change everything." Veronica looked away, her defenses crumbling. "I wish I could be more like you." Lila smiled gently. "You can. It just takes practice." As the days passed, the hospital became a place transformed. The staff worked together with renewed purpose. Patients smiled more, laughed more, healed more, and at the center of it all was Lila, the janitress who had reminded them all of the power of a simple song. As spring edged into summer, the hospital's gardens bloomed with color, and the city outside seemed to pulse with new life. Inside, Roland's recovery became the talk of not just the hospital but the entire city. News outlets ran features on the billionaire who found healing in a song, and social media buzzed with speculation about the mysterious janitress whose lullabies had done what medicine could not. But for Lila, the attention was overwhelming. She had never sought the spotlight. Each time a reporter tried to corner her for a quote, she would slip away, finding refuge in the quiet corners of the hospital, the chapel, the laundry room, the rooftop garden where she sometimes went to watch the sunrise. She found comfort in the routine of her work, in the simple acts of care that had always defined her life. Roland, too, was changed. He spent less time on business calls and more time talking with patients and staff. He asked about their families, their dreams, their struggles. He listened in a way he never had before, his heart open in a way that surprised even himself. The billionaire who had once been feared for his ruthlessness, was now beloved for his kindness. One afternoon, as Lila was cleaning the hallway outside Roland's suite, she heard laughter from inside. She peeked in and saw Roland sitting with his children, a board game spread out on the table. Richard was arguing over the rules, Veronica was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes, and David was quietly moving his pieces, a small smile on his lips. It was a scene Lila had never witnessed before. A family, not just a collection of heirs. Roland noticed her at the door and waved her in. "Lila, come join us. We need a tiebreaker." She hesitated, but the warmth in his voice drew her in. She sat at the table, and for the next hour she was not the janitress, not the outsider, but simply Lila, a friend, a part of something larger than herself. After the game, as the siblings left to take a call, Roland turned to her. "You've given me more than you know, Lila. You've given me my family back." She smiled, her eyes shining. "You did that yourself. You just needed a little reminder." He reached for her hand, his grip strong. "Promise me you'll stay in touch, no matter what happens. I want you to be part of our lives." Lila nodded, her heart full. "I promise." But not everyone was ready to let go of the past. The hospital board, still wary of the attention, began to push back. They worried that Lila's growing influence might set a precedent they couldn't control. They called a meeting with Roland, urging him to distance himself from the janitress to focus on his recovery and his business. Roland listened patiently, then shook his head. "If you want to fire someone for being kind, you'll have to start with me." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the old rules no longer applied. Meanwhile, Lila continued her work, her days filled with small acts of kindness. She sang for patients who were afraid, held the hands of those who were lonely, and listened to the stories of those who had no one else to talk to. She became a legend in the hospital, a symbol of hope and healing. One evening, as she was leaving for the night, she found Veronica waiting for her in the lobby. "Lila, can I talk to you?" Veronica asked, her voice uncertain. "Of course," Lila replied, setting down her bag. Veronica hesitated, then spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about kindness. I realized I've spent so much of my life trying to be strong, to be in control, that I forgot how to be gentle. I want to change. I want to be better." Lila smiled, her voice soft. It's never too late, Veronica. Change starts with a single step. Veronica nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Lila, for everything. As the weeks passed, the Ashcroft family grew closer. They spent more time together, not just in the hospital, but outside as well. They visited the gardens, shared meals, and even volunteered at local charities, inspired by Lila's example. Roland's health continued to improve, and soon the doctors declared him well enough to go home. The day of his discharge was a celebration. The staff gathered in the lobby, applauding as Roland walked out, Lila by his side. Reporters snapped photos, but for once Lila didn't shy away. She stood tall, proud of the journey she had taken. As Roland stepped into the waiting car, he turned to Lila. This isn't goodbye, it's just the beginning. She smiled, waving as the car pulled away, her heart light with hope. The hospital felt different after Roland's departure. The halls were quieter, the staff more reflective, as if the whirlwind of his illness and recovery had left a gentle hush in its wake. Lila returned to her usual duties, but nothing was quite the same. She was greeted with smiles and nods wherever she went, and patients she'd never met before asked if she would sing for them. The legend of the Janitress who healed the billionaire had become part of the hospital's very fabric. But Lil A remained humble. She still swept the floors, emptied the bins, and wiped down the windows with the same care as always. She found comfort in the routine, in the small acts of service that had always given her life meaning. Yet she couldn't help but feel a quiet pride when she saw the changes her presence had inspired. The nurses were gentler with their patients, the doctors took more time to listen, and even the administrators seemed to walk with a lighter step. One afternoon, as Lila was cleaning the family waiting room, she heard a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see David, Roland's youngest son, standing in the doorway with a shy smile. Hi, Lila. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you did for my father and for us. She smiled, setting aside her mop. You're welcome, David. I'm glad I could help. He hesitated, then stepped closer. I used to think that money could fix anything, but you showed me that sometimes what people need most is just someone to care. Lila nodded, her eyes kind. We all need that, David, even the strongest people. He looked down, his voice soft. I want to be better. I want to make a difference, like you. She reached out, squeezing his hand. You already are. Just keep listening to your heart. As David left, Lila felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the Ashcroft family would be all right. They had found their way back to each other, and she had played a small part in that journey. The weeks passed, and life at the hospital returned to its usual rhythm. But the story of the billionaire and the janitress lingered, a quiet reminder of the power of kindness. Lila continued to sing for patients, to comfort the lonely, to bring hope where there was none. She became a mentor to new staff, teaching them not just how to clean, but how to care. One evening, as she was leaving for the night, she found a letter waiting for her in her locker. The envelope was thick, the handwriting elegant. She opened it and read, Dear Lila, there are no words to express my gratitude for what you have done. You gave me back my life, my family, and my hope. I have made arrangements for a foundation in your name, dedicated to bringing comfort and kindness to those in need. I hope you will accept this gift, not as payment, but as a token of my appreciation. With all my heart, Roland Ashcroft. Lila's hands trembled as she read the letter. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep, abiding joy. She had never expected recognition, never sought reward, but to know that her kindness had inspired something lasting, that was more than she had ever dreamed. The next day, the hospital buzzed with news of the new foundation. Staff and patients alike celebrated, and Lila was honored at a small ceremony in the hospital garden. Roland and his children attended, their faces radiant with pride. Lila stood before them, humble and grateful, her heart full. As the sun set over the city, Lila sang her lullaby one last time, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. The staff, the patients, the Ashcroft family, all listened in silence, their hearts touched by the simple beauty of her song. When the last note faded, Roland approached her, his eyes shining. You changed my life, Lila. You changed all our lives. She smiled, her voice soft. You changed mine too. The garden was quiet, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. In that space, surrounded by those she had helped, Lila felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. As the ceremony ended and the guests drifted away, Lila lingered in the garden, watching the stars appear one by one. She thought of her mother's lullaby, of the lessons she had learned, of the journey that had brought her here. She knew that her story was just one of many, that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. And so, as the night deepened and the city lights flickered in the distance, Lila made a promise to herself to keep singing, to keep caring, to keep believing in the power of kindness. For in the end, it was not wealth or power that healed the world, but the simple, enduring gift of a gentle heart. And as Lila walked home that night, her song lingered, a promise of hope forevermore.